Alpha, I say, looking him dead in the eye, you are no longer my type. Kale's jaw tightens. Behind him, two guards shift uncomfortably, unsure whether to step forward or pretend they heard nothing. You will address me properly, he says. In this shop, you aren't an alpha, you're a customer. And right now, you're a customer who's wasting my time at the invoice sitting untouched on the counter between us. Now pay for my time or leave. I have other appointments. His hand curls into a fist at his side. For a man who once had an entire household bow at the sound of his footsteps, he looks remarkably unsteady standing in my shop, staring at a stomach he put no effort into acknowledging for 4 months. To understand how we got here, an alpha reduced to silence in a shop he would have looked down on months ago, you need to know what happened 3 months earlier, the morning I woke up in a body that wasn't mine, being thrown out of a house that never wanted me in the first place. You're watching BL Stories by K. Please like and subscribe. The last thing I remember from my old life is a delivery truck running a red light. The first thing I remember from this one is cold stone under my knees and a voice above me, sharp and final. Get him out of my sight. I open my eyes. Wrong hands, wrong body. Thin wrists trembling, a stomach that isn't flat. A manor hall I've never seen in my life, and an alpha standing over me with an expression carved from ice. Kale. Alpha Kale. I know his name the way you know a stranger's name from a script you never agreed to perform in. Instinct, borrowed memory, someone else's life bleeding into mine. Please, a voice comes out of my mouth, thin and desperate, before I fully understand it's mine now. Kale, I didn't take anything, I swear it. Save it. The evidence is clear. My mother's jewelry found in your room. You've embarrassed this house for the last time. I understand in the space of a single breath exactly what's happened, not just where I am, what I am. The body's memories arrive in fragments. An Omega named Kian married into this house 2 years ago, pregnant, framed, discarded. The fragments keep coming, faster now, disorienting in their intimacy. Kian's wedding day, nervous and hopeful, believing an arranged match could still grow into something real. The first year, quiet and lonely, Kale's attention consumed entirely by duty and politics, never once turning fully toward the Omega sharing his home. The pregnancy announcement met with polite acknowledgement rather than joy, 100 small dismissals stacking one on top of another until they formed the foundation of an entire marriage built on absence rather than cruelty, which somehow feels worse than outright cruelty might have. I press a hand against the cold stone floor, steadying myself against the sheer volume of memory flooding in at once. My own life, 34 years of it, sharp and complete, sits alongside Kian's borrowed one, 2 full existences occupying a single trembling body. I didn't take it, I say again, though the words feel foreign now, borrowed from a person weaker than I plan on being. Doesn't matter anymore, Kyle says, already turning away. The divorce papers are being drawn up. Sign them and leave quietly. That's the only kindness you'll get from me. I stay on my knees a moment longer, not from weakness, from calculation. Whatever Kian was before I arrived, I am not going to spend whatever life I have left in this body begging a man who's already decided I'm disposable. The full picture comes together over the following hour, pieced from Kian's borrowed memories and the whispers of servants too afraid to look at me directly. The jewelry wasn't stolen by Kian. It never left the house. Kyle's new fiancée, a noblewoman named Seraphine, poised and calculating in equal measure, planted it herself, 3 days before the wedding announcement Kyle hadn't yet made public. Kian never knew. Kian spent 2 years loving a man who never once looked at him the way he deserved, carrying a child Kyle barely acknowledged, absorbing every slight as though he'd earned it. I piece together more of the household dynamics as the hour stretches on, servants offering fragments of information in hushed, careful tones, clearly afraid of being overheard by anyone still loyal to the household's official version of events. Seraphine has been a fixture at Kyle's side for the better part of a year, her family's political connections apparently worth more to him than 2 years of a quiet, uncomplicated marriage nobody in this house ever seemed to value particularly highly. He never loved him, one older servant murmurs, refilling a water pitcher with hands that shake slightly, whether from age or nerves I can't quite tell. Young Kian deserved better than this house ever gave him. Another servant, younger, braver, or perhaps simply less careful, adds a detail that lands harder than the rest. Lady Seraphine visited 3 times that final week, always when the Alpha was occupied elsewhere. Nobody thought to question why. I file the information away, useless for changing anything that's already happened, but oddly clarifying regardless. Kian wasn't simply unlucky. Kian was systematically, deliberately removed from a life that had already quietly decided to discard him, piece by careful piece, long before the actual accusation ever surfaced. I am done absorbing anything. "You're certain you want to sign?" the steward asks, sliding the papers across a low table in the receiving room. His voice carries no warmth. Nobody in this house has offered me warmth in longer than Kian's memories can properly account for. "Give me the pen." He blinks, clearly expecting tears, pleading, some final attempt to save a marriage that was never actually a marriage in any sense worth saving. I sign my name, Kian's name, without a single tremor in my hand. Kale watches from the doorway, arms crossed, unreadable. No protests? Would they change anything? No. Then I'll save us both the performance. I set the pen down, meet his eyes directly for the first time since waking in this body. You've changed. You have no idea. Kian's memories tell me exactly nothing about how to survive outside an Alpha's manor with 2 months of pregnancy and no coin to my name. My own memories, 34 years of building an interior design firm from nothing, of clawing through an industry that ate people alive, tell me everything I need. The first week is brutal regardless of skill. Society doesn't forgive a discarded Omega quickly. Landlords look at my stomach and my lack of an Alpha's name attached to any paperwork and decide instantly that I'm not worth the risk. Mira finds me on the 4th night, sitting on the steps of a boarding house that's already turned me away twice, and doesn't ask a single question before offering her spare room. "You don't know me," I tell her, exhausted, wary of a kindness I haven't earned in this life. I knew the old you, enough to know something's different now. Doesn't matter which version I'm looking at. Nobody deserves to sleep on cold stone carrying a child. I don't cry. Kian would have, I think, somewhere underneath the borrowed memories still settling into my chest. I don't have the luxury of tears yet. I have a body that needs food, a mind that still remembers how to build something out of nothing, and exactly 1 month before the morning sickness makes standing upright a genuine challenge. "Thank you," I say, and mean it more than the words can carry. The nights are the hardest part, even with Mira's small kindness holding the worst of the cold at bay. I lie awake more often than I sleep, one hand resting over a stomach that isn't flat, wondering what kind of life I'm capable of building for a child whose father looked at me like an inconvenience rather than a person. The physical toll compounds everything. Morning sickness arrives without regard for the fact that I need to be functional, coherent, capable of presenting myself to a world that's already decided I'm worthless. Some mornings I lose an hour simply recovering enough to stand upright, Mira holding my hair back with the quiet, practiced patience of someone who's clearly done this before, for someone else, in some other difficult chapter of her own life she's never explained. I don't have to keep doing this, I tell her, one particularly brutal morning, ashamed of how much I've come to depend on a kindness I still don't fully trust. "I know I don't have to," she says, echoing words I'll hear again months later from someone else entirely. Doesn't change that I want to. Beyond the physical exhaustion, there's the constant low-grade humiliation of being visibly pregnant and visibly without an Alpha's protection in a society that treats both as moral failings rather than simple circumstances. Merchants who once would have bowed to Kian's status now look through me entirely, or, worse, look at me with the particular pity reserved for someone they've decided has ruined their own life through carelessness rather than betrayal. I learned to walk through markets with my chin level, refusing to shrink under the weight of stares I've done nothing to earn. Some days it's easier than others. Some days, exhausted and nauseated and cold, I have to remind myself, deliberately, sentence by sentence, that none of this is my fault, that survival isn't something requiring anyone else's permission. I decide, somewhere around the second week, that pity isn't a strategy. Grief isn't a strategy. The only thing that's ever gotten me anywhere, in either life, is work. Kian's world doesn't have interior design, not the way I understood it. It has decorators who copy the same 3 styles the nobility has favored for 100 years, charging enormous sums for imagination nobody's bothered exercising in a generation. I have 34 years of a dead career and nothing left to lose. The first shop I open is barely a shop at all, a single rented room, Mira's savings covering the deposit, a handful of fabric samples and paint swatches I source from merchants desperate enough to extend credit to a pregnant, disgraced Omega with nothing but confidence to offer as collateral. "This is insane," Mira says, watching me sketch a room layout at 2 in the morning, exhaustion doing nothing to slow my hands. "I've done this work my entire life," I say, not bothering to explain further. She wouldn't believe me if I tried, and honestly, some days I barely believe myself. The early weeks test every ounce of resolve I've carried over from my old life. Merchants hesitate before extending credit, wary of a name attached to scandal rather than reputation. I negotiate anyway, using instincts 34 years old and arguments that land differently in a world unfamiliar with modern persuasion tactics, but somehow effective regardless. "You drive a hard bargain for someone in your condition," one particularly stubborn fabric merchant tells me halfway through a negotiation that's already run 20 minutes longer than either of us expected. "My condition has nothing to do with my judgment," I say, sliding a revised offer across his counter. "This is a fair price for goods that would otherwise sit unsold in your storeroom for another season. Take it, or I'll find a merchant more interested in profit than pride." He takes it, grudging but impressed despite himself, and becomes one of my most reliable suppliers within a month. The first client is a minor merchant's wife, unable to afford the fashionable decorators, willing to gamble a small sum on an unknown name. I redesigned her sitting room in 4 days. Clean lines, deliberate color, a use of natural light nobody in this world has apparently considered before. She cries when she sees it, actually cries, standing in the doorway of a room transformed from cluttered and dim into something that finally feels like her own. "How did you know that this is exactly what I wanted? I couldn't have described it myself." "That's the job," I tell her, listening to what people can't quite say. She tells 2 friends. Those friends tell 4 more. Within a month, I have more requests than I can physically handle, exhaustion and pregnancy fighting for control of a body that refuses to slow down regardless of what either demands. He arrives on an ordinary Tuesday, unannounced, studying the small shop's exterior with an expression I can't immediately read. "I was told a genius works here," he says, stepping inside. Tall, dark-haired, and Alpha's presence carried without an Alpha's usual arrogance weighing it down. "I'm told that often," I say, not looking up from the fabric samples spread across my table. "What do you need?" "A study. Something that doesn't look like every other Alpha study in this city." He glances around the shop, taking in details most clients skip entirely. "This space, by the way, you designed it yourself?" "I did. It shows restraint, confidence without access." He studies me now instead of the shop, something considering in his expression that isn't quite the appraisal I've grown used to from other clients. "You're further along than I expected given the workload you're apparently carrying." I brace for the judgment I've come to expect from that observation. It doesn't come. "Should I come back another time, if the workload is too much right now?" I manage my own schedule. "I don't doubt that." Something almost like a smile crosses his face. "I'm Rowan. Just Rowan is fine, if that's easier than the titles." "Kian," I say, offering nothing further, unused to a client interested in more than the transaction itself. We spend the next hour discussing the study's requirements, and I notice, gradually, that his questions differ from every other client's. He asks what colors I'd suggest based on how a room should feel, rather than simply what's currently fashionable. He asks about the practical function of the space before its appearance, a rare enough priority among nobility more concerned with impressing guests than actually living comfortably in their own homes. Most clients skip straight to asking what will impress their peers, I observe, sketching a rough layout as we talk. "I've never particularly cared what impresses my peers," Rowan says, easy and unbothered. "I care whether a room actually serves the person living in it. Seems like a reasonable priority, though apparently an uncommon one in this city." Refreshingly uncommon, I agree, surprising myself with how easily the words come. He commissions the study, pays fairly, without haggling, without the subtle condescension I've grown accustomed to from nobility dealing with a disgraced Omega running his own business out of necessity rather than choice. He returns 3 weeks later, ostensibly to inspect the finished work. He returns again after that, with no clear commission at all, simply to ask how the shop is progressing, how I'm managing, whether Mira and I have everything we need. "You don't have to keep checking on me," I tell him the 4th or 5th time he appears without an obvious reason. "I know I don't have to." He shrugs. Easy, unbothered. I want to. There's a difference. I don't know what to do with that kind of ordinary kindness yet. Kian's memories offer nothing useful here. 2 years married to a man who treated basic decency like a foreign concept. I learned slowly that not every alpha operates that way. I ask Mira about him eventually, curious despite myself. "Do you know anything about this Rowan? He's an alpha, clearly, wealthy, and yet he spent more time in this shop discussing nothing in particular than most clients spend discussing actual commissions. He's a minor lord, owns land 2 provinces over, mostly keeps to himself from what I understand. No scandal attached to his name, which is rare enough in the city to be worth noting on its own. No scandal seems almost suspicious given everyone else I've encountered." Or, Mira says, glancing up with a knowing look I choose to ignore, "Some people are simply decent, Kian. Not every kindness is a trick waiting to reveal itself." I don't fully believe her, not yet, though something in me wants to. Rowan's continued presence, gentle and undemanding, slowly chips away at an instinct I've earned the hard way. The assumption that every alpha's attention eventually curdles into something closer to ownership than care. He never once asks about the pregnancy in a way that feels like an interrogation. He never once suggests I owe him anything for the quiet, consistent kindness he offers. Some evenings he simply sits, reading while I work, present without demanding my attention, a kind of company I didn't know I was capable of appreciating until he offered it. By the 4th month, my small shop has become something closer to an institution than a business. Nobility now request appointments weeks in advance, willing to pay triple the going rate for a design philosophy nobody else in the capital has bothered to attempt. I hire 2 assistants. I move into a proper storefront, twice the size of the original room, windows large enough to display finished work to the street outside. Mira manages the accounts, sharp enough with numbers that I'd have drowned in logistics without her. The pregnancy, meanwhile, has stopped being something I hide and started being something the entire capital has an opinion about. A disgraced Omega, pregnant, building an empire out of nothing, while the alpha who discarded him prepares for his own wedding. It's the kind of story society can't resist gossiping over, regardless of which side they claim to favor. Not every reaction is kind. I learned quickly that success doesn't erase judgment, only complicates it. Some clients whisper behind gloved hands about the scandal even while commissioning my work. Others arrive purely out of morbid curiosity, wanting to see the discarded Omega everyone's discussing, rather than genuinely valuing the craft. I stopped caring somewhere around the 3rd such visit, watching a noble woman's expression shift from pity to poorly concealed fascination as she takes in both my swollen stomach and the immaculate showroom surrounding it. "You're rather composed," she remarks, "for someone in your situation." My situation is a business that's outperforming every decorator in this city. Would you like a consultation or simply the gossip? I charge for the former. The latter's free and available at any tea house in the capital. She flushes, chastened, and books a full consultation before leaving. I've learned these past months that confidence disarms judgment faster than any defense ever could. Other encounters prove harder to disarm. A minor lord visits one afternoon, ostensibly interested in redesigning his study, spending most of the consultation instead asking pointed questions about my situation, clearly fishing for details to carry back to whatever social circle he intends to entertain them with. I don't discuss my personal life with clients, I tell him, closing my sketchbook with enough finality that he finally takes the hint. If you're here for design work, I'm happy to continue. If you're here for gossip, the door is behind you. He leaves without booking anything, and I feel not even a flicker of regret over the lost commission. Some clients aren't worth the toll they take. Mira watches these encounters with a mixture of exasperation and quiet pride, always ready to step in if a client pushes too far, though I rarely need the backup anymore. 4 months of practice have sharpened whatever instinct I arrived with into something closer to armor. "They're calling you the discarded genius," Mira tells me one evening, sorting through the week's commissions with visible amusement. Apparently it's meant as a compliment now, not an insult. "Let them call me whatever sells more chairs." She laughs, the sound genuine in a way I've come to rely on more than I probably should. "You changed so much these past months, I almost don't recognize you some days." "Good," I say, and mean it entirely. Rowan continues visiting, though the commissions have thinned into something closer to a pretense than a genuine business need. He brings tea some afternoons, sits quietly while I work, asks questions about the child without a trace of the discomfort I've grown to expect from anyone learning I'm carrying another alpha's baby. "Does it bother you?" I ask him directly, one particularly slow afternoon, tired of guessing at motives I don't fully trust yet. "That I'm pregnant with someone else's child?" He considers the question seriously, the way he considers most things. Should it? Most alphas would say yes. Most alphas are fools. He meets my eyes steadily. "The child isn't a complication to me, Kian. If anything, it's simply part of who you are right now. I'm not interested in a version of you that exists separately from that." I don't have a response for that one. I just return to my work, heart doing something complicated I don't have the emotional bandwidth to examine too closely. Not yet. Not with everything else demanding my attention. He arrives on a Thursday afternoon, and I know something's wrong the moment the bell above the door announces his presence, because every conversation in the shop stops at once. Kale. Older looking than I remember, though it's only been 4 months. Expensive coat, the kind of composed arrogance that comes standard with a title, entirely unprepared for what he's about to walk into. "I need to commission a nursery," he says, addressing my assistant instead of me, clearly not having registered who owns the shop yet. My assistant, wisely, says nothing, simply gesturing toward the back of the shop where I'm reviewing fabric swatches at my desk. Kale turns. Recognition arrives slowly, then all at once, his expression shifting through several stages of disbelief before settling into something unreadable. "Kian," he says. "Alpha Kale. I don't stand. I don't need to anymore. I understand you're looking for nursery design work? He stops, gaze dropping briefly to my stomach, clearly doing math he should have done 4 months earlier. "You're still pregnant." Observant. I gestured toward the fabric samples in front of me. "You mentioned a commission. Would you like to discuss it, or would you prefer to stand there recalculating a timeline you should already understand?" Something in his expression cracked slightly. Not quite guilt, not quite shame, something adjacent to both that he clearly wasn't prepared to feel walking through my door today. The shop around us has gone entirely silent, every client and assistant pretending to focus on their own business while clearly absorbing every word. I don't bother lowering my voice for their benefit. Let them hear it. I have nothing left to hide from a city that's already decided months ago exactly what kind of person I am. A young assistant near the front counter freezes mid-task, fabric sample still clutched in her hands, eyes wide as she processes exactly whose child is being discussed in the middle of the showroom floor. I catch Mira's eye across the room, and she gives the smallest, barely perceptible nod, ready to intervene if I need her, content to let me handle this myself if I don't. "How far along?" he asks, voice quieter now. "Does it matter?" "Kian." 6 months, I say, watching the number land. Which means, unless your mathematics have deteriorated significantly since our marriage, this child is yours, not that you asked before today, not that you asked much of anything before today. He sits down without being invited to, hand pressed briefly against his forehead, the picture of a man realizing far too late the actual size of what he's discarded. He doesn't leave immediately. I almost expect him to, the way he's expected me to disappear quietly for every difficult conversation we've ever had. Instead, he sits, uninvited, in the chair across from my desk, silent for a long moment. I should have known. The timeline. I should have realized before now. You should have realized a lot of things before now. Kian? Alpha Kale, I correct, sharp enough that he flinches slightly. We are not on a first-name basis anymore. You made that decision the day you signed papers dissolving whatever we were, based on evidence your own fiancé planted. His head snaps up. You know about that? I've known for months, Kale. Everyone in this city knows. You're the only one who apparently hasn't bothered asking the right questions. He goes pale, whatever composure he arrived with completely abandoning him now. Seraphine did this? Seraphine planted your mother's jewelry in my room 3 days before your wedding announcement. I didn't take anything. I never took anything. You simply chose to believe the easiest explanation instead of the true one because it was more convenient to trust the person you'd apparently already decided to discard. Why didn't you tell me? Fight the accusation at least instead of simply signing the papers and disappearing. Fight it with what evidence, Gale? Your household staff answers to you, not to me. My word against a planted piece of jewelry and your own fiancé's testimony was never going to hold up, and we both know it. I chose to leave with whatever dignity I had left rather than beg a man who'd already decided my guilt before I'd said a single word in my defense. He doesn't argue. There's nothing left to argue with, and some small, exhausted part of me is almost disappointed he doesn't try. I need to think, he says eventually, standing on unsteady legs, about the child, about... You don't get to think about anything, I say, voice flat, final. You had 6 months to think. You spent that time planning a wedding to the woman who destroyed my reputation and threw me out while pregnant with your child. Whatever thinking you have left to do it somewhere that isn't my shop. He comes back 3 days later, this time without the pretense of a commission, standing in the doorway with an expression I don't have patience left to interpret generously. I've spoken with Seraphine. The engagement is off. Congratulations, I say, not looking up from my work. That's between the two of you. I want to make things right, Kian. With you. With the child. There's nothing to make right. You made your choice months ago. I've built an entire life since then that doesn't require your correction. I'm the child's father. You're the man who signed away any claim to that title the moment you chose your mother's jewelry over 2 years of marriage without asking a single question first. I finally look up, meeting his eyes directly. Biology doesn't override choice, Kale. You chose to believe the worst of me without evidence. I choose, now, not to hand you a second chance you haven't earned. I have authority here. As Alpha, I could... You could what? I stand now, done sitting through a conversation that's already run its course. Force me back into a house that never wanted me? Drag me into a marriage you dissolved the moment it became inconvenient? Try it, Kale. See how quickly the entire capital turns against an Alpha who spent 4 months letting a pregnant Omega he discarded build an empire from nothing, only to try reclaiming him the second that empire became impressive. His jaw works silently for a moment, the reality of his position finally settling in. That's not what I want. I don't particularly care what you want anymore. He returns a final time, 2 weeks later. And this is the visit that matters, the one everything's been building towards since the moment I woke up in a body discarded on cold stone. I need you to reconsider, he says, standing at the counter, guards flanking the doorway in a display of authority that lands as pathetic rather than intimidating now. The child deserves a father with a title, a proper household. The child deserves a parent who chooses them, I say, sliding an invoice across the counter between us. Something you demonstrated quite clearly you're not capable of when it mattered most. Kian. Alpha, I say, looking him dead in the eye. You are no longer my type. His jaw tightens. Behind him, the guards shift uncomfortably. You will address me properly, he says. I'll address you as a client, nothing more. I gesture at the invoice. Now pay for my time or leave. I have other appointments. His hand curls into a fist at his side, and for one long moment, I think he might actually argue further, cling to whatever authority he believes still applies here. Instead, something in his expression finally, fully collapses. Not anger anymore, just the slow, complete understanding that he's lost something he only recognized the value of after it was already gone. He pays the invoice, silently, exactly the amount listed, not a coin more or less. He leaves without another word, and I watch him go without feeling a single flicker of the satisfaction I expected this moment to bring. Just relief. Quiet, total relief, like setting down a weight I didn't fully realize I'd been carrying. Rowan finds me an hour later, closing shop for the evening, expression carefully neutral in a way that tells me he already knows exactly what happened. Word travels fast, I say. The whole street heard him leave. You could hear a pin drop for a full minute after the door closed. He studies me carefully. Are you all right? I think I am, actually. I lean against the counter, exhaustion finally catching up now that the adrenaline's faded. Strange feeling being all right. I haven't had much practice at it lately. Mira, who's been quietly closing up the front register during our conversation, glances over with a small, knowing smile. For what it's worth, that was the most satisfying thing I've watched in months. The way his face just fell apart when you slid that invoice across the counter. I wasn't trying to satisfy an audience. No, but you did anyway. She finishes locking the register, gathering her coat from the hook by the door. I'll leave you two to finish closing up. Good night, Kian, Rowan. Once she's gone, the shop settles into a quiet that feels different than the tension of an hour earlier. Softer, safer, entirely without the weight Kale always seemed to carry into any room he entered. You've had 4 months of practice from where I've been watching. He steps closer, careful, giving me every opportunity to step back if I need to. I meant what I said before about the child not being a complication. I want you to actually believe that, not just hear it. Why? I ask, genuinely curious now, tired of assuming the worst of every alpha's intentions. You could have any Omega in this city. Why choose someone carrying another man's child, discarded, dragging a scandal behind him everywhere he goes? Because none of that changes who you actually are. He reaches for my hand, slow, deliberate, giving me time to pull away. I don't. I've watched you build an entire life out of nothing these past months, watched you refuse to shrink, refuse to apologize for existing, refuse every small cruelty this city's tried to hand you. That's not a complication, Kian. That's exactly the person I want to know better. What if I'm not ready to give anyone that kind of access again? Kale taught me a lot about what happens when I trust the wrong person with something fragile. Then I'll wait, Rowan says, simple and certain. I'm not offering you a deadline, Kian. I'm offering you the option whenever you're ready to take it, if you're ever ready at all. That's the whole arrangement, no pressure attached. I don't have a clever response for that. I just let him hold my hand, standing quietly in the fading evening light, something in my chest loosening that's been tight since the moment I woke up on cold stone 4 months ago. I'm not ready for anything complicated, I say, honest, needing him to know exactly where I stand. Then we won't be complicated. We'll just be whatever this actually is, at whatever pace it needs to be. He squeezes my hand gently. I'm not going anywhere, Kian, not because of obligation, because I want to be here. The remaining months of the pregnancy passed differently than the first 4 did. Steadier, calmer, no longer defined by survival alone. Rowan visits daily now, no pretense of commissions required. He helps where I let him, respects the boundaries I set without complaint, never once makes me feel like carrying another man's child is a debt I owe him patience for. We fall into a rhythm neither of us discusses out loud, but both seem to understand instinctively. Mornings, he brings tea and whatever news the capital's been circulating, filtering out the crueler gossip before it reaches me, though I always find out eventually anyway. Afternoons, he sits reading while I work, always offering an opinion on a design choice, always deferring to my judgment when I push back. You could just tell me you like this fabric better, I say one afternoon, watching him hesitate over two nearly identical swatches I've asked his opinion on purely to include him in the process. I don't want to influence something that's entirely your craft. You won't. I have very strong opinions, Rowan. Ask any client who's tried arguing with me about window placement. He laughs, easy and warm, a sound I've come to genuinely look forward to hearing. Fair enough. The blue. Definitely the blue. See? Was that so difficult? Terrifying, actually. I felt real fear. Some evenings, once the shop closes and Mira's gone home for the night, Rowan stays a little longer than strictly necessary, the two of us settling into a comfortable silence that requires no explanation or justification. I find myself more than once watching him across the room and feeling something I haven't let myself feel in longer than I can properly account for. Not gratitude exactly, though there's plenty of that too. Something closer to safety. The particular, unfamiliar sensation of being around someone who wants nothing from me beyond my own comfort and well-being. "You're staring," he says, one such evening, glancing up from his book with a small, knowing smile. "I'm thinking." About? How strange it is that the safest I've felt in either of my lives is sitting quietly in a half-finished shop with sawdust on the floor and a man who's never once asked me for anything in return. Something soft crosses his expression. I'm not planning on changing that arrangement anytime soon. Good, I say, and mean it entirely. Cale doesn't return during these months. Word reaches me occasionally, secondhand, through clients who can't resist sharing capital gossip. His engagement to Seraphine fully collapsed once the truth of the frame-up became public knowledge, his reputation taking a hit he apparently didn't see coming, despite having every opportunity to prevent it himself. I feel nothing when I hear the updates. Not satisfaction, not pity, just the distant, disinterested awareness of a chapter that's already closed. Somewhere in the past year, without quite noticing the exact moment it happened, Cale stopped being a wound and became simply a fact, something that happened to me once, shaping the path that led here but no longer holding any power over how I feel walking through each ordinary day. "You're glowing today," Mira tells me one afternoon, watching me sketch a new commission despite my rapidly diminishing ability to comfortably sit at a desk. "I'm 8 months pregnant and exhausted." "That's not what I meant." She smiles, warm, genuine. "You look happy, Kian. Properly happy. I haven't seen that since before I even knew you." "I think I am," I say, and realize, saying it out loud, that it's entirely true. Rowan finds me later that evening, settling beside me on the small couch in the back of the shop, one hand resting gently near my stomach without quite touching, always asking first. "May I?" he asks, the same question every time, patient in a way that still occasionally catches me off guard. "You may." He rests his hand there, careful, reverent, and I watch something soft cross his expression as the baby shifts beneath his palm. "Strong kick," he says, something like wonder in his voice. "Takes after the other father, apparently. Stubborn, refuses to stay still." "I think they take after you," he says, glancing up at me. "Strong, refuses to be underestimated." The birth itself is difficult, long, exhausting in ways neither of my lives fully prepared me for. Rowan stays through every hour of it, despite not being obligated to, despite this not technically being his child to worry over. "You don't have to be here," I tell him, somewhere in the worst of it, too exhausted for anything but bluntness. "I want to be here," he says, simply, the same answer he's given every single time I've questioned his presence in my life these past months. There's nowhere else I'd choose to be. The hours blur together, pain and exhaustion collapsing time into something formless. Mira stays close on the other side of the bed, offering water, cool cloths, quiet encouragement whenever the worst of it threatens to overwhelm me entirely. Rowan holds my hand through every contraction, absorbing the grip of a hand desperate enough to nearly break his fingers without a single word of complaint. "You're doing so well," he murmurs, more than once, voice steady even as his own face has gone pale with worry he's clearly trying not to show me. "Don't lie to me right now," I manage, half a laugh, half a groan of pain. "I feel terrible." "You look terrifying and magnificent simultaneously. I wasn't lying about the second part." Somewhere in the final, hardest hour, I stop being able to speak at all, every ounce of focus narrowing down to the single task in front of me. Rowan never once lets go of my hand, murmuring something steady and low I can't fully process, but somehow still find grounding in. The baby arrives just past midnight, a daughter, small and furious enough that the whole birthing room seemed to exhale in relief once her first cry broke the tension. "She's beautiful," Rowan says, voice thick with an emotion I don't fully expect from someone with no biological claim to her at all. "She is," I agree, exhausted beyond words, watching him hold her like something precious he has no intention of ever letting go of carelessly. "What's her name?" the midwife asks. I hadn't decided, not fully, though one name has been sitting quietly in my chest for weeks now, waiting for the right moment to claim it. "Aara," I say. After no one in particular, just a name that felt right. Rowan looks up at me, something soft and certain in his expression. It's perfect. Kale sends a letter 3 weeks after Aara's birth, requesting visitation, formal and distant in a way that tells me exactly how much has actually changed in him. I don't respond immediately. I sit with the letter for 2 days, weighing an obligation I don't technically owe him against a daughter who deserves the choice of knowing her biological father eventually, on terms that protect her rather than serve his guilt. Mira reads the letter over my shoulder on the second evening, expression carefully neutral in the way she reserves for topics she knows are mine alone to decide. "What are you thinking?" I keep going back and forth. Part of me wants to refuse entirely. Part of me remembers that Aara isn't just mine to make that decision for, not forever. She'll grow up eventually and want to know the full story, whatever I decide now. "That's a fair instinct," Mira says. "Whatever you choose, I'll support it. Just wanted you to know that." "What will you decide?" Kale asks, watching me set the letter aside for the 3rd evening in a row. "I'll allow supervised visits eventually, once she's older. Not because he's earned it, because she deserves the option when she's old enough to understand what that option means." I meet his eyes. He doesn't get access to raising her. He doesn't get a say in her life, just the chance to know her on terms I control completely. "That's fair," Rowan says, and I can hear the genuine respect in it, not just agreement offered to placate me. "Is it strange," I ask, "that I don't feel angry anymore? I thought I would forever. Some permanent burning thing. It's just gone, mostly." "I don't think it's strange." He reaches for my hand, the same gentle gesture from the very beginning. "I think you built something so much bigger than the anger that it simply stopped having room to matter as much." I keep waiting for it to come back, the anger. Some mornings I brace for it, and it just isn't there anymore. Maybe that's what healing actually looks like. Not a dramatic ending, just a quiet absence where the pain used to live. I think about that for a long moment, watching Aara sleep peacefully in her small crib across the room, entirely unaware of how much her existence has changed the shape of my life, in ways both difficult and ultimately worth every hardship it took to arrive here. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this particular kind of quiet. No scandal chasing me through the streets, no cold nights spent wondering how to survive the next month, just an ordinary evening with someone who chose to stay, and a daughter who will grow up never once doubting she was wanted. "I want to write back to him," I say, finally. Set the terms clearly, no ambiguity, no room for him to push boundaries later. "Want help drafting it?" "No," I say, standing to retrieve paper and ink from my desk. "This one, I need to write myself." The letter I send back is brief, precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Supervised visits, twice yearly, beginning once Aara turns 2. No parental rights beyond that. No expectation of anything further. He responds within the week, accepting every term without argument, a small, quiet acknowledgement of exactly how much power he's forfeited by waiting this long to want any of it. I fold the response letter carefully and set it aside, feeling nothing more than the simple satisfaction of a decision made clearly, cleanly, entirely on my own terms. Whatever anger I carried out of that manner a year ago has long since settled into something quieter, sturdier. Not forgiveness exactly, just the steady peace of a person who's built a life too good to keep looking backward at the one that failed him. The shop has expanded twice more since Aara's birth, a full storefront now. My name recognized across the capital as the standard other designers measure themselves against. Rowan moved into the rooms above the shop 6 months ago, an easy, unhurried transition neither of us rushed or overthought. Aara adores him completely, reaching for him first most mornings, a fact that used to make my chest ache with something complicated and now simply makes me smile. Papa, Aara says, her new favorite word, applied enthusiastically and often, reaching up from her small chair as Rowan enters the shop's back room, sawdust from a nearby carpentry commission still clinging to his sleeves. "Hello, little troublemaker." He scoops her up easily, pressing a kiss to her forehead, glancing at me with the same soft, certain expression he's worn since the night she was born. "Busy day?" "Steady, good kind of busy." I set down my sketches, watching the two of them with a warmth that still occasionally catches me off guard, even a year into this life I never expected to build. "You're covered in sawdust, by the way." "The nursery expansion required creative problem-solving," he grins, unbothered, bouncing Aara gently on his hip. "Turns out fatherhood and carpentry have more overlap than I expected." I watched them together for a long moment, Aara's small hands already reaching for the wood shavings still caught in his hair, Rowan laughing and letting her explore without a trace of concern for his own dignity in the process. A year ago, I woke up on cold stone, discarded and alone, certain the best I could hope for was simple survival. I got so much more than survival. I got this, a chosen family, a life built entirely on my own terms, a daughter who will never once have to wonder whether she's wanted. Mira stops by most evenings now, technically still my business partner, though our relationship has settled into something closer to family over the past year. She adores Aara nearly as much as Rowan does, spoiling her with small trinkets whenever she visits, insisting every time that it's just one small thing, despite the growing collection of small things now cluttering an entire shelf in the nursery. "You're going to make her insufferable," I tell her, watching her present Aara with yet another ribbon, this one dyed a deep, rich blue that matches nothing else in her wardrobe. "Good. The world could use a few more insufferable, well-loved children in it." Mira smiles, settling into her usual chair near the window. "Besides, I've earned the right to spoil her. I was there for the worst of it, remember? Cold stone steps and all." "I remember," I say, quieter now. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you for that night." "You've thanked me plenty, Kian. Building this shop was thanks enough. Watching you become who you were always supposed to be, that's payment beyond anything you could have offered otherwise." I glance around the shop's back room, Aara's small crib tucked in one corner, fabric samples scattered across every surface, Rowan's reading chair worn comfortably into the exact shape of a year's worth of quiet evenings. None of it looks anything like the life Kian's borrowed memories once expected, and none of it looks anything like the life I once built for myself back in a world neither of these lives fully remembers now except in fragments. It looks, simply, like home. Chosen, built, entirely earned, in a way neither the manor nor my old life ever quite managed to be. Kale visits twice a year now, exactly as agreed, formal and careful, Aara still too young to understand the full weight of who she is to her beyond a quiet, distant visitor who brings small gifts and asks polite questions. I don't feel anger watching those visits anymore. I don't feel much of anything, honestly, beyond the steady certainty that I made the right choice, drawing the boundaries I did, protecting the life I've built instead of reopening a door that never deserved reopening. The visits themselves stay brief, contained, entirely on my terms. Rowan is present for each one, not out of suspicion, but simple, steady support, standing close enough that Kale understands clearly whose household Aara actually belongs to, without a single word needing to be said on the matter. "Does it bother you?" I asked Rowan once, after an early visit, curious whether the arrangement weighed on him more than he let on. Watching him with her, even briefly. "Not particularly. He's a name she'll know someday, a piece of her history worth having access to. It doesn't change anything about what I am to her, day to day." He shrugged, easy as always. "I'm not threatened by facts, Kian, just committed to the parts of her life I actually show up for." That answer, more than almost anything else he's said in the year since we met, is the reason I trust him completely as I do now. His most recent visit, a month ago, ended with him lingering a moment longer than usual at the door, watching Rowan help Aara with her shoes, something unreadable crossing his face. "You've built something good here," he said. Quiet, none of the entitlement from those first difficult weeks left in his voice anymore. "I hope you know that." "I do know that," I told him. "It took me a while to trust it. I trust it completely now." He nodded, said nothing further, and left without the formal distance he usually maintains, something almost like peace settling into the space where resentment used to sit between us. Watching him go, I felt none of the bitterness I once assumed would follow me for the rest of my life. Just the quiet, settled certainty of a person standing exactly where he's meant to be, in a life he built entirely for himself, on his own terms, one difficult and ultimately worthwhile choice at a time. That evening, after Alaara's asleep, and the shop's finally quiet, Rowan finds me on the small balcony overlooking the street below, the same kind of quiet moment we've claimed for ourselves more often than either of us probably needed to discuss out loud. "You seem thoughtful," he says, settling beside me, close enough that our shoulders touch. "Kale visited today, said something almost kind for once. How do you feel about that?" I consider the question seriously, watching the last of the evening light fade over rooftops I've grown to love more than I ever expected to love anything in this life. Lighter, actually. I think I've been waiting for some kind of closure without realizing it, and today finally gave me a small piece of it. "I'm glad," Rowan says, simple and sincere. "You've earned every ounce of peace you can find, Kian, in whatever form it arrives." "I've found most of it already. Right here, actually." I lean into him, the familiar warmth of his presence settling something in my chest that used to feel perpetually unsettled. "You, and Aara, and a shop full of work I actually love. I didn't expect any of this waking up on that floor a year ago." Neither did I, honestly, walking into a small, half-finished shop expecting a simple study commission. He presses a kiss to my temple, soft and certain. Best unexpected turn my life's ever taken. "Mine too," I say, and watch the city lights flicker on below us one by one, marking the quiet, ordinary end of another entirely good day. "Any regrets?" Rowan asks me that evening, once the shop's closed and Alaara's finally asleep, settling beside me on the same small couch from all those months ago. "None," I say, certain in a way I couldn't have imagined the morning I woke up on cold stone, discarded and alone. Not one. "Good answer." "I learned it from someone," I say, leaning into him, the weight of an entire difficult year finally, fully settling into something that feels, at last, like peace. Outside, the capital carries on without paying either of us much mind anymore. No longer gossiping about the discarded genius, no longer speculating about scandal and ruin. Just a designer, a father, and a daughter, building an ordinary, hard-won, entirely chosen life together. One quiet evening at a time, in a home neither of them ever expected, but both, in the end, chose completely.